Welcome to another edition of Church and State with Chris Farrar and Brian McCall. It's nice to see you, Chris.
And you too, Brian. Glad to be back. I understand you had a little bit of a problem with a certain hurricane.
Yes, but things are, getting back to normal. But it's a good reminder, things like that God's in control, because there's really nothing you can do when you're in the midst of it. But I have to say, Governor DeSantis did a phenomenal job in Florida preparing. When the meteorologist told him it was going to hit 500 miles away from where it did, he was there, had things taken care of. They've cleaned up all around where I am. So really, he did a great job. But we are, before we get into our stories, we are recording today on October 13th, which is the feast of St. Edward the Confessor. But yesterday was October 12th, which for a long time in this country has been Columbus Day. The day we remember when Christopher Columbus came to this hemisphere and landed in San Salvador and planted the cross. But it's been a big movement the last couple of years to cancel Christopher Columbus, to get rid of Columbus Day, either call it Indigenous Peoples Day, who didn't really do anything on October 12th, so I don't get that, and take down his statues. What more is going to get canceled, do you think, in our country?
Well, in terms of church and state, it's the age of iconoclasm, both in the state and in the church.
Yes.
They're tearing down statues and wrecking sanctuaries in the church, and outside, the secular saints are being torn down in their commemorative statues. So, this is all part of the general collapse of institutions, both ecclesial and civil, that we're seeing now in a way we've never seen in my lifetime. I always tell my children, you're seeing things now that you've never seen before. They used to be skeptical of that claim. Oh, come on, the world has always been bad and people have always been saying it's the end. They're not singing that tune anymore.
Yeah.
Now they realize we're dealing with forms of radical evil that have no precedent in world history.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the charges they level against Columbus and the Spanish explorers, et cetera, is they came and stole everybody's land. And it's interesting. I don't know about you, but I remember when I took property class in law school, we started with the discovery doctrine, which was the doctrine that the first country to discover, say Spain, didn't get the land, but had the exclusive rights to negotiate a treaty with the native people on the relationship they have with them or buy land from them. So again, ironically, in all their insanity, they don't even get the facts right. They claim they showed up and stole the land, whereas the Catholic Church and the law passed by the Pope was in this doctrine that's come down to property law. The first person there is the first person that gets to negotiate with the native people on whatever arrangement you want. But again, they just say they stole the land.
Well, someone has said somewhere, and I forget who it was, that all title to land originates in conquest.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, somebody conquered someone else's territory and made it his own, including the Indians. I'm sure there were intertribal warfare and wars and battles of all kinds, and turf was occupied by one tribe that had formerly been occupied by another. So saying who is the quote owner unquote of land is a murky inquiry that could go on forever, and you never really reach the original title holder.
Yes.
So basically the doctrine, I think Pope Leo says this in one of his encyclicals, he who takes the land that is unoccupied and cultivates it in an age when there were no titles, there were no recorded deeds.
Yeah.
That's the owner of the land. Someone has to be the owner.
Yes.
Of course, the church always says that with land, there are common rights to be enjoyed by the whole community. Hence the famous commons of pre-Protestant England, where the vast landowners didn't fence off their land and install tripwires with shotguns attached, but rather let the people in the community forage for nuts and firewood and graze their cattle in the commons. But anyway, that's a whole different subject.
Another subject. But, well, anyway, let's turn to our stories for today. First, we're going to start with the church and the synods on synods on synods on synods cubed. You got to have a meeting about a meeting. That we've been talking about several times in the past. But interestingly, there was a quite explosive interview on October 7th given by the former head of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Gerhard Müller. And he said some interesting things. Just want to read a quote about the synod. He was asked about what's going on with the synod and his comments on this initiative. He said basically it's an initiative of self-revelation as opposed to the Catholic faith. So I'm going to read his sort of fuller quote. This is a system of self-revelation, and is the occupation of the Catholic Church, the hostile takeover of the Church of Jesus Christ, which is a column of the revealed truth. He went on a little bit to say, this has nothing to do with Jesus Christ, with the triune God, and they think doctrine is only like a program of a political party who can change it according to their voters.
Well, that's the essence of modernism, the evolution of doctrine and dogma, and that's what we're seeing with these synods. And it's odd, isn't it? And I talked about this at the Catholic Identity Conference, how we see the phenomenon of projection operating with this Pope. Like any liberal, he's a radical liberal. He accuses others of what he himself is. So you know about his constant complaints about traditionalists as being Gnostic and Neo-Pelagian. Well, what is more Gnostic than the idea that we consult the Spirit for the latest bulletin from the beyond on what direction the church should be taking? That's what these synods are all about. They're just a megaphone for Francis, really, but the phony presentation is that this is the Spirit guiding the church. That's sheer Gnosticism. If we have to listen to the Spirit every so often at meetings where we vote, then the church is a Gnostic sect, and only the initiates know what direction the church should take, and they get to meet in Rome and tell us what our faith is for the coming week.
Exactly. Well, what's interesting about this is, I mean, he's using really strong terms, hostile takeover and occupation. I mean, he's really saying that they're attempting to infiltrate the church. But
well, they have.
Isn't he a little late for that comment?
Yeah. Well, this is what's going on in the church as well as the state. We were saying from the beginning, in terms of the state, that the COVID regimes were frauds, that these restrictions had nothing to do with limiting the spread of a disease, as we obviously see. And the more they imposed the restrictions, the worse it was, according to them. So let's impose the restrictions again, and let's vaccinate people with vaccines that aren't vaccines, and now are being shown to actually cause more harm than good. So it's all a bunch of lies told by people to promote a fictional narrative about change in the church, and that's what's going on with these synods. These people are change agents who want to destroy the church, and that's what this hostile takeover is all about. And they have infiltrated already. They're everywhere.
Well, and it's somewhat ironic that, I mean, this is Cardinal Mueller, because I remember back, I think we were in Italy together, back when Pope Benedict appointed him head of the CDF. You know, we were pretty worried because he wasn't the most orthodox theologian in terms of his record. Right? He proposed ideas about maybe the virgin birth wasn't really the virgin birth, and maybe Christ's physical body didn't really rise. And it's kind of interesting that now he seems to be this, saying, "Wait, stop! This is going too far." I mean, that's the sort of phenomenon we're seeing. Yeah,
it's not surprising, but like the so-called conservatives who finally caught up to reality in terms of the COVID regimes, and now admit what we were saying for 2 years. He's now admitting what we've been saying, and others before us have been saying for 60 years, that the church is undergoing an invasion from within and is being subverted from top to bottom. And this is the final stage of that, a hostile takeover of the church, according to a cardinal, speaking of the Pope's initiative. So what does this mean? He says that if they succeed in doing with the synod on synodality what the Germans have done, it would be the end of Catholicism. Well, it wouldn't actually be the end of Catholicism because of the promises of our Lord, but then where would the church be? Did our Lord ever really promise that we would have forever a hierarchical structure centered in Rome with an identifiable pope? And he might be a validly elected pope, but maybe he's a pope who doesn't defend the faith. He abandons the faith. He abdicates from the throne. You could say that about Francis. So if that happens, and if he allows the synod and synodality to proclaim changes in doctrine, and some dioceses adopt changes in doctrine, does that mean it's the end of Catholicism? No. It's the end of Catholicism in those places. But the church will endure until the end of time, as it did during the Arian crisis, even if it's only in the desert.
Well, let's turn one part of his comment. He says that this is self-revelation rather than revelation. And how does this fit in with modernism and pretty the sort of approach of Pope Francis. What does he mean by self-revelation?
It's the old heresy of immanentism.
Yes.
To remain within from the Latin. Or is it Greek? I think it's Greek.
I think it's Greek. Yes.
It's a Greek root. Yeah. To remain within. So what happens there is that you look within, religious inspiration comes from within. You don't believe by hearing from an external source. And by the way, you were required to affirm that faith comes from hearing, preaching by an external source. That was in the oath against modernism. Ex auditu, by hearing, not from within, not from inspirations. And this, again, this is sheer Gnosticism being promoted by a pope who condemns traditionalists for being Gnostics. We're the precise antithesis of Gnosticism. We don't look within, we look without. We listen to one who speaks with authority. Not a pope who promotes novelties, but the magisterium of all time. All the popes speaking as one, what the church has always and everywhere believed. Not this innovator who, to quote a caption from the libels of accusations against John Paul II, will ruin the world. Remember the Abbé Dinant and his libel of accusations?
Yes.
Against John Paul II? He said, innovator, you will ruin the world. Well, yes. Now John Paul II is looking pretty good by comparison, and this innovator really could ruin the world.
Yes, yes. Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is really the way Francis kind of operates. You get the impression he like woke up this morning, maybe had a little indigestion, then gave an idea of, oh, maybe this would be a fun thing to try, and then runs with the idea. I mean, again, this idea that truth is determined by what we feel inside.
That's modernism. That's the essence of it. It's the Protestant principle of private judgment, but it's even worse than the Protestant principle of private judgment, because the more conservative evangelical Protestants have certain lines they will not cross and certain doctrines they will always defend. The more conservative ones. So, for example, the Missouri Church, Missouri Synod Lutherans are a good example of that, or perhaps the Presbyterian Church of America. I mean, compared to us, their preaching is laden with errors against the faith, but there are certain core doctrines they would never touch. So this is even going beyond Protestantism to a total dissolution, really, of revealed religion. And that's the end result, as Pius XI warned, with this kind of indifferentism toward doctrinal teaching, religious indifferentism, ecumenism, pluriconfessional gatherings in various places. They end, said Pius XI, by altogether abandoning the revealed religion. And this is the fundamental attack on revelation by the Enlightenment divines of centuries ago, now reaching its final conclusion within the Catholic Church. They succeeded in attacking revelation in civil society by the practice of revolution, severing any remaining connection between church and state. And the Anglican Church at least tried to preserve some semblance of an attachment to revelation. And the original idea of the Enlightenment divines was, you don't need revelation, you just need basic morality. As long as you're a good person, you can be an atheist. You don't need any church telling you this is what God has revealed. Well, this Pope not only is tossing revelation overboard, he's going after morality itself. The natural law on fornication, adultery, and so forth.
And it seems really this synod is teeing up big time homosexuality and contraception for a major change, a change that the relator of the synod has already said is on the table, that is appearing all over the rigged synodal reports, as from the United States, for example, where they just load it with what they want to hear, and maybe even ordination of women. But as Mueller says in the interview, nobody can make an absolute shift and to substitute the revealed doctrines of the church. But they have these strange ideas. Doctrine is only a theory of some theologians.
Yeah, well, that's, again, the modernist credo. And this is all being signaled, by the way, in what was presented by the shamelessly apologetic neo-Catholic press as a direction to halt the German synod's tendency toward dissolution of doctrine. The July statement, the unsigned July statement from the Vatican, which basically says to the Germans, not stop, but a yellow caution light. If you read that document, the document says, you can't go off on your own and change doctrines and establish new structures. No, you must do this in harmony with the universal church. And the universal church is enriched by the dioceses, just as the dioceses are enriched by the universal church. So you can't do what you're doing unless there's consent at the level of the universal church, as if there could be consent
Right.
to a change in doctrine or establishing new structures that are not part of the divine constitution of the church. So it's a yellow light. Wait for our consent. And that's what these people are hatching as their unsigned so-called warning to the Germans, which is actually an encouragement, said back in July. And since the Germans voted in September to say that sodomy is no longer a sin and the catechism should be amended accordingly, has the Vatican stepped in to say, no, that's impermissible? No, not a word.
Not at all, right? So again, it's to me, it's really ironic that somebody who really was very, not the most orthodox person is kind of what we're looking at, saying, you took this too far. You took our principles too far. And sadly, for all the good statements you make, isn't willing to go back to the root cause and realize what let these ideas into the church was dropping the floodgates, dropping the anti-modernist oath, as you referred to, basically letting our guard down. And that happened at Vatican II to open the window that John the 23rd wanted to let what Paul VI then called the smoke of Satan into the church.
And Mueller says, regarding the synod and synodality and its obvious intentions, we must resist.
Yes.
That phrase is in his interview. A representative of some publication called The Pillar, which is more like a tower of jello, in my opinion, appeared at the Catholic Identity Conference and took the press conference speakers to task for saying the Pope must be resisted. Well, Mueller himself has just said the same thing. One of the highest ranking prelates in the church, a man of erudition, impeccable theological credentials, he's calling for resistance. And of course, you have to resist when the Pope does something that attacks the foundations of the faith. So to The Pillar, if you're watching this, when will you publish a retraction of your accusation that there's something theologically impermissible about saying a pope must be resisted when he departs from the faith, as this pope has so obviously done on occasion after occasion?
Well, take it up with Cardinal Mueller, Pillar.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of an occupation, Washington, D.C. is occupied by some real radical authoritarians. Again, theme, Pope Francis, very authoritarians. And a real plan seems to be revealing itself, being executed, where the Justice Department and the Attorney General in name only are targeting people whose exercising their free speech rights in a way he disagrees with should be persecuted. I mean, it's kind of a story of a third world country. But over the past few weeks, there have been several stories of raids of homes of pro-life advocates, people who pray or exercise their First Amendment rights outside of or near abortion clinics, having FBI, in their own words, SWAT teams swoop into their house. One of these individuals, Mr. Vaughn, he and his wife, who were arrested, was putting his little 11 children in the car to go to school when the FBI pointed, in his words, a long gun at one of his little children. So I think what's going on here, and can the federal government get away with this?
Well, what's going on is that the FBI and the Department of Justice, now thoroughly occupied by Biden-esque radicals, are being used as the Stasi, the enforcement arm of the Democratic National Committee. We have a thoroughly politicized federal law enforcement apparatus being unleashed upon Americans. Now, some of these people who were rounded up, perhaps they engaged in sit-ins, perhaps they engaged in trespass. These are classic forms of civil disobedience, normally prosecuted as misdemeanors or violations under state law, and even under FACE if you're a first offender and you're accused of obstructing clinics' entrances by sitting in a hallway, for example. It's a misdemeanor first offense, up to a year in prison. If you have a good record and you have a decent judge, you might even get probation. But what they've done here is, with these arrests, they've pinned the FACE charges to a federal statute, 18 U.S.C. 241, that makes it a criminal offense to conspire with others to deprive someone or to interfere with or intimidate someone in the exercise of a right guaranteed by the Constitution or federal law. Now, the Constitution no longer and never did guarantee a right to abortion. So I guess the theory is that these people sitting in hallways or lying down in front of an abortionist car, classic civil disobedience that's never harshly punished anywhere, that these people are engaged in a civil rights conspiracy, which is a felony, up to 11 years in prison. So they're taking a conspiracy to commit a misdemeanor, converting it into a felony. And this shows a couple of things: the abuse of that statute, conspiracy statute, and secondly, that face has to go. At some point, that statute has to be declared unconstitutional because on its face, no pun intended, it's content-based. It's directed against, obviously, protest activity at particular locations. There's a fig leaf in there where you're also prohibited from interfering with a church service, the provision of face, to make it look like it's a content-neutral statute. But everyone knows this was adopted to stop a particular protest movement, and that's why it's content-based. And its definitions of force, threat of force, and physical obstruction have become increasingly elastic over the years. It was a decision in the Second Circuit called GRIEP, G-R-I-E-P-P, in which a Second Circuit panel actually said, standing on a sidewalk with a sign and partially obstructing the sidewalk so that someone approaching a clinic has to walk around you is obstruction and violation of face. Basically, all protest activity that occupies physical space outside of an abortion clinic obstructs access. That decision was so bad that when en banc review was sought by Thomas More Society attorneys, the three-judge panel had to vacate its own decision. It was so embarrassingly bad. So that decision no longer exists. But it's typical of the way face has been abused, and its terms, which are supposed to be narrowly construed, have been elasticized to encompass an increasing amount of core speech. And that's probably what we're going to see here. Sitting down in a hallway and then told by a police officer to leave, and you don't leave, and the police officer picks you up and takes you out. That's not a criminal offense, at least not a federal criminal offense. It might be trespassing. But even in the hallway, it's arguably not trespassing. It's a common hallway in an office building, for example. So this is an alarming development. They're coming for pro-lifers. They're coming for anyone that challenges any of the narratives of the regime, as we see also with anyone who challenges the COVID narratives. They'll go after your medical license. If you challenge the last election, they'll go after your law license. Democrats can challenge elections. They can say they were stolen by Russia. Stacey Abrams can say, I'm the real governor of Georgia. No one does a thing to her. But if you're a Republican, the apparatus is being unleashed against you at all levels.
Well, and again, as I said in all these reports, in a very brutal way, again, a Stasi-type way. I said, showing up at a family's home with little children with guns blazing. And just another example, this is...
Well, not blazing, but pointed.
Well, pointed, yes. Mr. Chet Gallagher, they came after him with guns pointed. This man, I mean, he looks really scary to me. Looks like a really big, scary guy. He's 74 years old, and you need a bunch of FBI agents to take him down.
Well, these are the tactics of the Stasi. These are the tactics of the Nazi regime. These are the tactics of totalitarians. Intimidation by a show of force. They have the guns. You don't. You'd better stop what you're doing. And if this isn't a campaign to chill the First Amendment rights of the pro-life movement, I don't know what would be. But that's what's going on here. They want to terrorize everyone who challenges any official narrative of the Democrats into silence.
Well, and again, one other example, just to show the politicization here. So another person who has been arrested and indicted by the FBI is a lady named Eva Edel, who is 87 years old, and ironically was sent to a communist concentration camp in Yugoslavia when she was a little girl. So here you have this little girl sent to a concentration camp under communists, escapes communism, comes to the land of the free and the home of the brave, only to be arrested at 87 years old for praying outside of an abortion clinic. I mean,
I hope they get a decent jury, and a decent jury sees this for what it is, Gestapo tactics, and nullifies whatever legal instruction they get about this ridiculous case. I mean, this is a question of, Chesterton said this, when the big laws vanish, the ones against things like murder in the womb, then the little laws proliferate.
Yes.
And this is one of those little laws. If you sit down in a hallway and cause somebody inconvenience in accessing a room where her child is going to be murdered in the womb, you're the criminal.
Yes.
And not only that, if you and at least one other person conspire to sit down in the hallway and momentarily impede someone's progress to the killing chamber, you're a conspirator facing 10 years in prison.
Yes.
This is what America has come to.
Well, and looking at our two stories, I mean, interesting. The church, as Cardinal Muller points off, Revelation's been thrown out the window and everything goes crazy, right? Same thing in civil society. The rule of law, the principles of the natural law, thou shalt, life should be preserved, basic principle of the natural law, the procreation of children. Once you throw out that basic concepts of law, anything's game, right? Just as when Revelation is thrown out. So once again, we see, so goes the church, so goes the world.
Yeah, and also the unequal application of the law, while the law is still on the books, basically voids the law. Father Gruner always complained about this when he was alive. He talked about this idea of a law for one man.
Yes.
There's a law on the books, but it's only applied to one person, the one they don't like. And when law is applied that way, it ceases to be law. It's just the will to power.
Well, to prove that, are you aware of any of the people who violated federal law protesting in front of Supreme Court justices' personal homes last spring being arrested?
No.
I'm not aware of any indictments.
Not even charged under local law.
No.
No, the head of the Thomas More Society had his home, his front lawn and the front of his house invaded by an angry mob. They threw smoke bombs at his house. They spray painted his house in the driveway. And they milled around on his private property while the police watched. Finally, the police said, disperse. They dispersed. Not a single arrest. Not a single arrest, by the way, for all the fire bombings of of pro-life pregnancy centers across the country. At least 17 instances that I've read about, fire bombings and other forms of vandalism. No arrests, no prosecutions, no nothing. Because, as I say, we have a Justice Department that is basically the enforcement arm of the Democrats.
Yes, that's where we've come to, a totalitarian regime, really, in church and
Never
state.
thought I'd see it. We always said it could happen here. We always mocked the idea that it can happen here. And we would always say it can happen here. But I never really thought it would happen to this extent.
No.
If you challenge an official narrative in any prominent way, you can expect to be criminally or civilly investigated and perhaps arrested and put in prison at this point. And, the Supreme Court will have to get involved in some of these signal cases at some point, put a stop to this madness. Let's hope they do. Beginning with Trump, by the way, whose petition to allow the special master to review the so-called 100 classified documents is before the court. He wants the special master to review these documents to see if they really are classified. How do we know what they are?
Yeah.
The government wants to hide them until trial. So, beginning with that, and we hope the Supreme Court does something to bring about the equal-handed application of the law. We'll see.
We will see, absolutely.
We're not getting the equal-handed application of the law in the church, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Well, and what can we do about it? Obviously, Our Lady gave us the answer. The Message of Fatima, the 5 First Saturdays, pray the Rosary. I am your last refuge, she's told us. And if you're interested in more about the Message of Fatima, just in a couple of weeks, you can see Chris and a lot of other really great speakers at a conference in New Hampshire. So take a look at the Fatima Center's website about their upcoming New Hampshire conference. Wish I could be there. It looks like a great event, and you can learn more about Fatima today. Great. Well, that's our view from today. It was good talking with you again, Chris, and hope to see you soon.
Till the next time. Take care. God bless.